leading off with Mike Trout. He's quick. He's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tool player. He's one of the best. I always tell my hitters that he's one of the top 1% of the top 1%.
Welcome back to the Substantiate podcast. We're getting underway with year 2 of this podcast, season 4, coming up this fall, starting today. So I guess also then this summer, we're getting back to hypothetical sports matchups that I know you've been missing all summer long while I was away and just batch recorded a bunch of Q&A episodes. But we're back with some more episodes. And also just acknowledging that we're back. It is the fall, and I am the one that does all of the work for this podcast. I edit the podcast, plan it out. I do all the uploading and audio work. I book guests. I obviously am there for the recordings, and I also create all of the social media things. So just keeping all of that in mind and starting high school this fall, that basically what I'm going to go with here to make sure that I can meet this goal is I'm going to try to have a hypothetical matchup every other week, and at least for the time being, maybe some NFL coverage the week in between. And so those episodes might not be as long. They might feature a guest to talk NFL. They might be about some other sports like baseball as that season finishes up and as the NBA starts. So you can expect all kinds of things coming this fall, but what I will try my best to do is get a hypothetical matchup every other week. And obviously, if anything changes with that, you can make sure to follow on Twitter at SubstantiatePod and Instagram at SubstantiatePod. And of course, every week, if there's any new news, I'll update you here on the podcast. If you're new to the show, maybe Joey directed you over because he's going to be the guest today. Well, welcome. And so this week, I have Joey Meyers on as a guest, and he has a long history with baseball that he'll tell you about himself in just about a minute. And so basically, we talked about some old-time baseball players from the 20s to the 70s versus some current all-star type players. So if you're familiar with the game MLB The Show and you're familiar with the mid-century groundbreakers, this is actually the team that Joey is going to be using. So we each created lineups. We're going to talk about them a lot, and we mostly get into all different in-depth conversations from Ted Williams to Mike Trout to other players that are of Mike Trout's level, who are the best players in today's game that are on this field, who compares that we might one day look back on and be one of those all-time greats. So we're getting to all of that in just 1 minute. And before I wrap this up, thank you for coming back. Season 4 of this podcast. We're coming back strong. New episodes every Wednesday. You know where to come. And for the time being, I hope you enjoy this episode. And don't forget to share it with a friend or on social media. So with all of that out of the way, let's hear from Joey. Today, I'm joined by Joey Meyers. How are you today, Joey?
William, thanks for having me on, man. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Glad we could line up this recording. And so you have a very long and interesting background with baseball going back to your college days. So do you want to tell the listeners about yourself?
Sure. So I played baseball my whole life. I started off like many in Little League and developed probably the biggest love for the game in the late 80s. I know that dates me, William. I know you're a young buck, but that was the Oakland A's were my big one. Don Mattingly was my first baseball card. I know he's a Yankee because you've been a Yankee fan. He was my first baseball card, but I really liked the Oakland Athletics. And I think I liked them because of the green color. Green was my favorite color at the time. And then at that time, they were pretty hot. You had the 88 World Series against the Dodgers, which they ended up losing in pretty dramatic fashion with Kirk Gibson hitting the home run off the peg leg that he was running around the bases on. And then in 89, they swept the Giants in the Bay, and that just really set, then they lost to the Reds, or did they lose to the Reds in 1990? I think they lost to the Reds in 90. But that's what really set me on the course of just falling in love with this game. So I ended up playing baseball all the way through college. I got a scholarship to play at Fresno State. So I played 4 years there, and that was pretty much it. And then after that, got into training, both fitness training, but more so training hitters, baseball and softball alike. And it's what I do. It's what I would do if I had $100 million in the bank. I would train hitters. I like really staying in touch with the younger generation. And now it's mostly hitters I work with are from 11 years old all the way up through high school, college, and beyond. So that's pretty much my background, and I just love baseball.
Nice. And Fresno State, where another player we'll be talking about later, Aaron Judge, went. Although you played before he got there.
Yeah, well before. Yeah, 2003 was my last year. I think his first year was 7 or 8 or something like that.
Oh,
6
okay,
or
so
7.
not that far off.
Not too far. 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So today we're going to be talking about some all-time baseball players. More specifically, if you're familiar with MLB The Show, these players are coming from the mid-century Groundbreakers team. So these are players from I think as early as the 20s all the way to as late as the 70s. And these players are just the best of the best, all in the game, 99 overalls. And so that's going to be Joey's team. And my team is going to be some current players. So I just sort of combined the American League and National League All-Star teams from 2021 and created a lineup with players that I thought would be fun to play with. And we also have pitchers, obviously, as well as our hitters. And the pitchers are, we're not going to be really substituting pitchers. We're just going to keep it with the one basic for now. And I know that one thing that I was thinking about when crafting my lineup was sort of to contrast your team, Joey. And I went with some of the even younger players in the MLB now. So you still have your older players. I still have Buster Posey on my team, and we'll get more into the lineups in a minute or two. But I tried to trend towards the younger side. And it's a little interesting with your team because even though we might think of them as old now, this version of them playing is still them in their prime. So It's not old versus young necessarily. It's just sort of the difference in times.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So I guess you can start by going over your lineup here, and I'm looking at it here in the chat of our Zoom session. But if you're listening to this and these are a few lists, then if you just scroll down to the bottom of the show notes, I will include a list of both of our lineups and any other important players or lists that we talk about today. So you can start with your lineup, Joe.
Cool. Thanks, William. Yeah, so I started with just position-wise, and then I'll go into how I put shuffle those guys into an actual lineup. And that's really hard. As William said, we're talking about 1920s to the 1970s. That's 50 years there that we have to take the best of that. Whereas I think with Williams dealing in the last 10 years, maybe 10 years maybe.
I'm just going with the 2021 All-Stars.
Right, there you go. And he said he trended more towards the young ones.
Yeah.
So that is a challenge, and those listening out there that are baseball fans, historical baseball fans would know that challenge. So the pitcher that I started off with was Cy Young for obvious reasons, because the Cy Young Award is after him. And so he's my pitcher. Johnny Bench is gonna catch. we had to move some guys around, obviously from their normal positions, just because. And Babe Ruth is going to be my first baseman. I probably should have put Lou Gehrig there. I think that's where Lou Gehrig played, but got to move some people around. Stan Musial, I know he's in the outfield. I think he was in the outfield, so second base, but that was the only position I was unsure of. Willie Mays, I had to move him from the outfield to shortstop, from center field. Hey, shortstops and center fielders are your athletes on the team. You're true athletes. I was a center fielder when I played, so I got to say that. But I know our shortstops are always good. They're the quarterback of the team, basically. So I put Willie Mays there since he played center field. It's not too different, at least from a brain perspective, of playing shortstop. Brooks Robinson at third base, which was his home anyway. I got Hank Aaron in left field, and I think he played left. He was either left. He was one of the outfield positions, but if you can play one of them, you can play them all. Mickey Mantle in center, and Ted Williams in right, and then we have DH and for Cy Young is Lou Gehrig. So the lineup goes leading off. It's hard. There weren't really any base runner barn burners like Ricky Henderson. I couldn't choose from Ricky Henderson. So I put Stan Musial leading off, Lou Gehrig 2, which is crazy that you get to put Lou Gehrig at 2, Ted Williams 3, Babe Ruth, obviously batting cleanup, Hank Aaron 5th, which I would love to have Hank Aaron more in the 3rd, but hey, it is what it is. Mickey Mantle batting 6, Willie Mays 7, Brooks Robinson 8, and Johnny Bench is our 9 hitter, which is crazy. I think he batted 3, 4, or 5 in the lineup for the Reds. So one of the players that I really did a lot of research on, I read biographies to autobiographies, is Ted Williams. And Ted Williams was an interesting character. His parents, I think his mom worked for the Salvation Army, or it wasn't Salvation. Yeah, it was Salvation Army, I think. And his dad, I'm not quite sure. I don't remember what he did, but they were really never home. They were both workaholics. And Ted would always get home from school and nobody was home. And a lot of times the house was locked. And I don't know if his parents didn't give him a key or whatever. So he would swing a bat for hours and hours and hours outside, waiting for his parents to come home. And oftentimes at dark. And I think he was from the San Diego area. So you got nice weather and things like that. But he was very, very much of a perfectionist in the craft, and really loved baseball coming through. And I think at that time in the 40s, you're talking World War II, just coming out of World War I. And so patriotism was huge at that time. And I think baseball really represented patriotism. And so he really worked hard on his craft. He served in the military, I think as a Marine fighter pilot for 3 or 4 years. I think he missed.
Yeah, he was in a Navy pilot during World War II and Marine during the Korean War.
Korea, that's right. Yeah. So he served both times. And as a fighter pilot, had the 2010 vision, the whole thing. And at that time, people have to understand that they weren't getting paid baseball players like they are today. They were getting paid. I think Babe Ruth had the biggest salary at $100,000 a year. Now, obviously, inflation and all this different stuff we have to correct for. So maybe in today's game, that would be $1 million or a couple million or whatever. But these guys had to hold jobs. And there were stories of Mickey Mantle pushing coal mine trucks around. And that's a lot of what the big and strong of him was, working on the farm and baling hay and all that kind of stuff. And so these guys actually had to have jobs outside of the baseball season. And I can't remember who the quote was. I don't know if it was Ty Cobb or Hornsby or whoever it was, but they asked him, what happens? What do you think when baseball season's over? Like, what do you do? Like, what do you think? And they said, well, I just hope, and I get next to the windowsill and I gaze out and just hope for baseball season to start again, after it ends. So it's really refreshing to see a lot of these guys. And I recommend anybody out there that, even if you're not a huge baseball fan, but you like baseball, to do some research, whether it's reading a biography on any of these particular guys. Lou Gehrig, everybody knows Lou Gehrig's disease and the battle with that, and how sad that can be. It can take somebody who is super strong. I think they called him the Iron Horse, right? Yep. Lou Gehrig, and a guy that they called the Iron Horse ends up getting the Lou Gehrig's disease. They end up naming it after him at the time. And for those that do follow the history of baseball and remember that farewell speech of his was probably the craziest speech that you can give. And so that and then you got Hank Aaron, where Hank Aaron grew up in a not so good area. And I mean, you see the same tenacity, to the same work ethic, and as Ted Williams and any of these guys, and even the current guys work hard too. But these guys not having access to weight rooms or anything like that. It was all just natural, out cutting wood. It was baling hay. It was pushing coal mining trucks. It was all that kind of stuff. Hank Aaron in particular would hit a lot of bottle caps with broomsticks. They, like you hear about the stories in the Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico, or the not so high, socioeconomic areas in the world. And it's a wonder why these guys that come from Dominican and Puerto Rico, why they are hungry when they get here. And I think that's what was around back in the old time. The guys were hungry. Not to say that the guys now aren't hungry, but I think there was a drastic difference between the men of yesteryear and the Dominican guys that come in. I just think there's a little bit more hunger there than here. So that's what I think about these guys.
Yeah, that's fair. Circling back a little to the Ted Williams stories, and this past summer I read a book called Cloudbuster 9 on Ted Williams, and it's written by like the bat boy on the Navy team's daughter, something like that. But it gets into all of the different things and mostly about training and what it was like at Chapel Hill in UNC Chapel Hill, where he trained, as well as, I believe it said, 25 other major league players. But one of the things that influenced him was when he was taking classes about, different things about flying planes and how he became such a great pilot, and learning about all of the mechanics of, everything from the wind to the temperature to the weather, humidity, all of that stuff. And that is supposedly what helped influence his hitting, in the sense of he applied that to baseball. And if it's this hot out and it's this exact weather, then the ball or the pitch will spin more, won't spin as much, and he would incorporate it into his hitting. And that's part of his success. And it was just super interesting how, like you were saying about the patriotism at the time and, World War II, and how he played in a part of a game, the Cloudbusters, his team at the Navy base in Chapel Hill. He goes and plays in Yankee Stadium right after a Yankees versus Cleveland Indians game, and they were the Yanklins, a sort of combination of both team names, and they played to raise money, I think, in war bonds, something like that. But he was just all of that combined to make him such a great player. And it also noted that because his parents weren't home very often when he was younger, he didn't get great grades in school, and he was almost not accepted to the training program at Chapel Hill because of his poor high school grades. But ultimately, they lowered their requirements to get in. But all of these things are evident in his play and helped contribute to it all.
Yeah, and the book, The Science of Hitting. I mean, a lot of people in my industry that teach hitting, I read it probably hundreds of times and dog-eared it up and noted it up, and many other hitting instructors did the same. And he wrote that book, I think, in the 70s, maybe late 70s, maybe 80s, when he was coaching with at the time, the Washington Senators, I think is what it was. And he took, like you said, all that knowledge, all that physics knowledge that he had learned and applied it to hitting. And that's what we do. We do what he did, but we fill in the blanks where I think he left off. I think he was one of the best players brain-wise. He was able to conceptualize what it was that he did, although I think there are some missing links in there. And now, with access to the information and resources and experts, now we can now take some of the areas where he had these big gaps, he had these lines and he had big gaps, and then he had lines of content and whatnot. Now we can fill in the blanks with a lot of that. And I think what's out there now, he would be completely proud of the core group of people that are working on the hitting side of things. I mean, he would completely agree, I think, with what's out there now. But yeah, I mean, complete student of the game. He served his country. He was probably not the nicest person, but I think if you played in Boston at the time, where if you did well, they were cheering you. If you didn't do well, they jeered you. They were booing you. And that's what he got a lot of in Boston. And, when you're in an environment like that and he played with them, I think his whole career, when that happens, I mean, how else would you react? Would you love that when they're booing you and things like that? I mean, baseball is such an up and down sport. You have peaks and valleys. There's going to be times where you're going to be down. I mean, every player, Mike Trout hits 300 a year. He doesn't hit 1,000. He doesn't hit 500, and nobody's hit 400 since Ted Williams did it in 1941. So you're going to fail way more than you're not. So as a crowd, you have to be sensitive to that, right?
Yeah. And it's sort of funny here or talking about all this because as of the time we're recording this, the whole Mets incident and booing their own fans as a response to the fans booing some of the players, that was not looking too great for the Mets organization.
Not good optics.
But yeah, and I think probably one of the most simple examples of that is obviously when you're swinging the bat, you want to get the most momentum. So a combination of bat speed and the mass of the bat. And, obviously back then they didn't have the slow motion cameras to time how fast you're swinging and all of that. Although they could weigh the bats, but they knew about that back then, but they couldn't exactly measure it until more recently. And that's definitely something that, like you were talking about, he could continue with and just embrace even more as technology became more available.
Right. And you got to think about this too, is that back then they were more natural. They swung, they mimicked, they did what normal humans would do if they're trying to get good at something, and they wouldn't get too into the finer details. They wouldn't get lost in the weeds. Right. And I think what happened around the 70s, they started to there was some coaches out there, the Charlie Laus, and I don't know when Walt Reniak came out, but there was some different hitting theories that started to come out. And not saying they're bad. There's good in every hitting theory, and there's bad with everything. Even with my stuff, there's good and bad, pros and cons, right? And I think when you start to add the measurement stuff, the tech stuff you're talking about. So when we're radar guns, we're measuring ball exit speeds now and velocity, and now they have Rapsodo, which is measuring spin rate and all these. They're $8,000 contraptions that we call them just glorified calculators. They're calculating anything and everything that's physics. It's externally happening in the environment. And now what happens is, and this is in 2013 when I started hittingperformancelab.com, was I wanted to take and apply the scientific method to hitting, because there was so much information out there that people were promoting, that it just didn't sound right. So I figured, you know what, let's take the scientific method, which is you ask a question, you develop a hypothesis. So how do you think what the answer to that question is? You research, collect the data, do the experiment, right? And then conclusion. So you got 5 steps. So we did the same thing, and we would take one way to hit, like a technique, a certain technique, and then we would do the opposite. And we would attach one of those knob sensors to our bat that measured bat speed and your barrel attack angle and all these different metrics. And we would take 100 swings one way, 100 swings another way. And then we would, what they call counterbalancing that. So we would do 25, we'd break them into chunks of 25 swings, and we would take A hitting mechanic here and B hitting mechanic. And we would say 25A, we go 25B, B, and then 25A, right? And then we'd mix it on the next round. So it would take out the getting tired factor and getting warmed up factors. So we would do this with 2 different things, opposing views, and we would take the averages of those, and we would compare those and see which one was actually better when it came to the numbers. So I think that's what tech did, is it allowed us to now take numbers and attach value to one way versus the other, right? So back in the day with Babe Ruth and all them, they did that. And if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, then they'd stop doing it, right? But then these hitting theories would come around, and then it was more of, well, I'm so-and-so, or I learned from Ted Williams, or I learned from Tony Gwynn, and this is what we're doing. Well, that's great. And that's part of the whole equation, but let's put metrics to it and let's measure and quantify it and see which one actually wins out, which technique creates more power and which technique doesn't. And you can measure that with ball exit speed.
He's just an amazing person that was well before his time. And I mean, afterwards, even when he died, he like wanted his brain or body preserved, something like that.
Cryogenic freezing. Yeah, so they can reanimate him.
Yeah, but that just goes into like him and the legend of Ted Williams, that he was just so before all of this stuff, and he was ready for it, and he sort of developed a lot of the thinking in it.
And then what's interesting about these guys, and the newer guys, you don't get it so much because they don't have their careers as a portfolio to put forward. So these guys, obviously we can see their character diamond, right? We can see how when they started and how they got not stronger, but how they developed as their character, and at the end, how everything was. And like the Mickey Mantle, and I love Mickey Mantle. One of my best buddies, we played ball in high school together in college, and his favorite player, who's a switch hitter, my buddy was a switch hitter as well as Mickey Mantle. And that's why that was his favorite player. But I did a lot of reading on Mickey Mantle because my buddy, so I wanted to learn about him. And it's tragic, but also his career is with all the drinking, cirrhosis of the liver, all that kind of stuff. And it's tragic in a sense that he just, for whatever reason or another, didn't care. He was going to live every day like it was his last. And that was his character diamond as he played. So any decision that he made was all based on today. He wasn't thinking about tomorrow. And that's what I really like with these guys, that you get that character diamond of the main theme of their career. And you can almost get what their operating system is, their mental operating system on how they make decisions.
We'll be right back to this hypothetical sports matchup in just a moment. But let me tell you about these protein bars that I love, Built Bar. For those of you that are longtime listeners, you haven't heard me talk about these all summer, but they're just too good. I have to talk about them. So they have a new product, Built Balls. They're these little protein balls. My mom tried one earlier, and they have two flavors, coconut almond and peanut butter brownie. And they're both really good, so you can go try them, as well as some new flavors on the actual Built bars. So we've got the usual peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. Some new ones are orange, strawberry, and then all of the good ones, coconut, mint brownie. Love mint brownie, salted caramel, raspberry, double chocolate cookies and cream, cherry barcia. And let's say you don't want the full bar. Well, just order some Built Bites. They're about half the size of a bar with the same nutrition values for obviously half as much as the bars. And if you want, you can also get some Built Broth or Built Boost to put in a drink. And so these bars, they're delicious. You know the drill. They've got on average around 17 grams of proteins, just 4 grams of sugar, just 4 net carbs, and just 130 calories. So compared to some of these other bars, and if you go onto their website, built.com, they actually have a chart that compares them to the other bars. But honestly, it's not even fair to compare them to other protein bars because they taste so good. So they also have a comparison to candy bars like Snickers, Reese's, Milky Way, all that kind of thing. But obviously, Built bars are going to be much healthier than those. So you can go check those out. Built.com, I've got an amazing promo code for you. Code SUBSTANTIATE. Save yourself 10% off. And also, just forgot to mention this, brand new flavor coming out, I believe, at midnight. So by the time you're listening to this, it has already come out, is a new Built Puffs. We've got some mint marshmallow. So it's a Built Puffs mint marshmallow covered in dark chocolate. Go check it out. Most delicious protein bars you will ever have. And when you're there checking out on built.com, make sure to use code SUBSTANTIATE for 10% off. And so now we'll sort of switch over to my team, and I'll go over my lineup. So just like you, I'll start with the positions. So my team is all American League and National League All-Stars from the year 2021. So starting off pitching, Walker Buehler. As of the time that we're recording this, he has the lowest ERA in the MLB at 2.05. And then next catching is Buster Posey. And one thing I liked about this year's All-Star teams is both catchers were older. They're both in the twilights of their career, both Buster Posey and Salvador Perez. And I ultimately decided to go with Posey here, but definitely interesting to see how both catchers are a bit older. Next at first base, Vlad Guerrero Jr. How could you not? He's, I think, in second place maybe in the MLB in total home runs this year. And next at second base, also from the Toronto Blue Jays, Marcus Semien. And he's had a great year, former Oakland Athletic, I believe, right?
Exactly.
And next at third base, Rafael Devers, the Red Sox. I mean, he's been up in the MLB for a few years now, and he's just been tearing it up, finally getting an all-star appearance this year. Next at shortstop, Fernando Tatis Jr. And I know I've seen him play some right field recently. I don't follow the Padres so intensely, so I'm guessing an injury was involved there. But he's going to be playing shortstop today. And then next in the outfield, I have Mike Trout, Ronald Acuna Jr., and Aaron Judge. So I guess I'll put maybe Acuna in left, Judge in right, Trout in center here, and that's what we'll go with. But I think definitely Mike Trout in center, and Judge this year has played right and center, not so much left, but still we'll have Acuna on left. And last but not least is Ohtani DHing. So now this is one thing that I was telling Joey before we started recording here, but when you have players, whether it's current all-stars or these all-time greats, it's just so hard to decide who's batting last. And right in the bottom of your order, Willie Mays, Brooks Robinson, and Johnny Bench. Like, it's just hard to let go and just let them be last when you're like, well, I could also put them up here, but then this person's last. So it's very difficult to make these lineups, but ultimately I went with Mike Trout, Ronald Acuna, Vlad Guerrero Jr., Shohei Ohtani, Fernando Tatis Jr., Aaron Judge, Buster Posey, Rafael Devers, and last but not least, Marcus Semien. So that is going to be my team here today. And do you have any thoughts on my team, Joey?
Yeah, well, you got a barn burner leading off with Mike Trout. You know, he's quick. He's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tool player. I mean, he's one of the best. I always tell my hitters that he's one of the top 1% of the top 1%. And, you know, that's saying a lot. That's somebody that's in and out. The game, from what I've heard, I have some friends that played with him with the Angels, Daniel Robertson, and he got to talk to Trout quite a bit. And he said it's different with Trout than others mindset wise. And he said a Trout, whereas a normal person would just say normal major leaguer, the normal 1% would say, yeah, I just want to play well so I can stay in the league, so I can stay up at the major league level. Whereas a guy like Mike Trout is thinking that he's thinking of a World Series ring. He's thinking of an all-star appearance. He's not thinking about just staying in the league and playing just as good to stay in the league. He wants to be like the best of all time. And if we go back to my lineup, most of those players, that's their attitude, being the best. I think Ted Williams over and over, and all from biographies to autobiographies, it was, I want to be the best hitter of all time. Right. And arguably you could say that he was, if not top 5, top 3 of all time. So Mike Trout, I like that one. He's going to go down in history. He'll be one of those Ted Williamses. You know, they say that, well, Ted Williams couldn't play, he couldn't hit like he did in today's game. And I said, well, you have to think about it this way. I said, there are advances in technology. There's advances in training. There's advances in different things, but you have to think about it's the hardware, the software, and the brain doesn't change. The top 1% of the top 1%. So whatever era you put them into, they're going to do well. Will Ted Williams hit 400 in today's game? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe he will. I don't know. He just did it once, 406 and 41. But if you want to see how Ted Williams or Babe Ruth would play in today's game, I tell my hitters, I tell people online to go look at Mike Trout, look at Miguel Cabrera, look at these guys that are top 1% of 1%. And maybe physically they're stronger than a Babe Ruth. They're bigger like Mike Trout. I mean, arguably the guy I wouldn't want. I mean, you could see that guy as an Urlacher with the Bears, right? As an inside linebacker, Mike Trout. He's got no neck and he's just a big old slab of meat that you wouldn't want to meet on the street, right? So Babe Ruth, he would whoop Babe Ruth's butt, maybe even Ted Williams, but the software is still the same. So I like to see Trout up there. Acuna Jr. and Vlad Jr. and Tatis Jr., they're all really good hitters that we're watching. We're watching really close, and we'll see how their careers play out. I think as long as they can stay healthy and stay out of trouble, not saying these guys are troublemakers, but I know some of them have a little Latin blood in them, and that Latin blood can get you into trouble. But if they can stay healthy and stay out of trouble, I think they're going to have pretty decent careers, and maybe not Mike Trout type careers, but I think they're going to be up there. And of course, Ohtani, I mean, he's doing it all, bringing it in as the DH and pitcher. He can do both. So that's a good one. And Judge, of course, and he's a big dude, 6'8", 6'9", 280 pounds. I think he's lying on that. He's got to be 300 something. It's a big dude, to see in center field. You could probably, like I say, you can see him from the moon. So I think that was a good choice. And Posey is always a good staple, even though he's getting a little bit older. But as for a clubhouse chemistry factor, I mean, he's great for that. Great dude. You're not going to see that guy get into trouble, at least not yet. And you're going to see a lot of guys. He's the captain, right? He's the guy. He's the general. He's the one the troops look to for advice not only on the field, but off the field. And he's just one of those type of guys.
And I think also on this list, I think out of all the players on my team, he's won the most World Series at 3. And it's interesting that you bring up Mike Trout with that, because Mike Trout nor Ted Williams ever won a World Series. Yeah. And in most other sports, the greatest of all time all win multiple championships. In the NBA, Jordan won 6, Kobe won 5 or 6, LeBron has won 4, and potentially more to come. And neither of these players have ever won a World Series. And does this speak to just the way the team's built? Did they not be as a strong enough leader? Is it, what might be a reason for some of these?
Yeah, so there's multiple reasons. I think a big one is when you look at a basketball team, you got 5 guys on the court, where on baseball you have 9, right? You have a lineup of 9, arguably 10 if you got a DH. And what happens in baseball, we say it's an individual sport, but a team sport. So you have small piece, you're a small cog in the wheel. You're not the whole wheel, you're not the whole thing as one player. Now, one player like Trout can go 3 for 4, 4 for 4 with the homer, 2 doubles. And if nobody's on base, it doesn't really matter. Good example is a hitter I work with, a junior in high school, big dude, about 6'3", 6'4", and he's being highly touted, recruited right now he's pretty much going to be able to write his own ticket in college. Wherever he wants to go, he'll be pretty much be able to go when he graduates. And I'm sure he'll have a bunch of scouts, professional scouts on his tail. One of his high school coach this last year had him batting leadoff as a sophomore, which to me and everybody I talk to are flabbergasted as to why that's the case. Because number one, he's not super fast. He probably, in baseball, they rate speed based on a 60-yard dash, which is really dumb because the base paths are 90 feet. So that you'd be better to do a 40 like what football does, right? Than 60, but whatever. So on the 60, he runs a 7.4, 7.5, something like that, maybe 7.2. Trying to get him below 7, that would be pretty good for a guy of his height. But he's not a base burner. He's not fast. He obviously hits for power. And a game I went to watch him, and on the other team had some of my other hitters too. So I like to do that when I have other hitters, my hitters coming into town and playing the team that he's on, because I'm close by. They threw the other team's pretty good. They threw a high fastball or inside fastball, and he smashed it. I mean, the thing took off like a rocket and it was out. I mean, everybody started cheering, but like right when he hit it, it was out. You know how many were on base? 0. So what are we doing? And so part of the basketball getting the NBA championships with Jordan, and Jordan was really good. Jordan had everything. I mean, he was competitive. He was a team player. He was a chemistry guy. He was just skillfully, just super awesome. I would say he's probably the best of all time. Like I think so. Mm-hmm. He also had guys like Pippen. He had Rodman, later on in the 90s. He had other guys that were around him that were also helping quite a bit. And I think he realized early on with the Bulls that he wasn't going to be able to do it by himself, and that he needed some guys that were good. Pippen was really good. People don't understand how good he was. If you watch what's the documentary? The Last Dance. Yeah. If you watch that, you'll understand. They say it over and over how good Pippen was. But he didn't look as good next to Jordan. It's like, but he was still good. So he had some good guys that were around him. But in baseball, I think it's when you look at the Yankees, the history of the Yankees, and you see how many championships they've won. I think all time they got the most championships, right? Or is
27.
27 championships. And you look at their lineups over eras, and they just stack their lineups full of guys. And that's full of dudes, not guys, dudes, right? And they pay them good money. So I think a lot of it with baseball, with the championships, there comes, you have to have a bunch of dudes in a lineup in order to compete. But even having dudes, and we've seen that with the Yankees as well. I think the Yankees are a great petri dish. We get to see different experiments. So we've seen Yankee teams that have had dudes, but maybe the chemistry wasn't there. Maybe the dudes that they put on, they were just like a Darryl Strawberry who was in it for themselves, or like a Bobby Bonilla. And I love those guys. I love Darryl swing. I enjoyed watching him play, and Bobby Bonilla and stuff. But there was one quote, I think it was Bobby Bonilla. He was overheard in the shower. I think they had just lost. I don't know if it was he was with the Mets, I think, at the time. And he was on deck. The hitter in front of him, there was 2 outs. The hitter in front of him gets out. And then he's in an interview after the game. He says, I wanted it to be me. Why couldn't it be me? It was all into himself instead of, hey, I'm going to help my teammate out, like Derek Jeter. Right. A guy like that. I like Derek Jeter. I think he was an ambassador to the game throughout his playing career. And there's a book that I read called The Captain. That was really good. And it was I think unauthorized biography. It wasn't Jeter's, but he had everything. He wasn't a big power guy, but he was a leader. He had the team chemistry factor. Guys went to him again for advice, like Buster Posey. Right. So I think there's multiple factors in baseball that are working. So we can't really say, well, Ted Williams, he just never won one. So is that a knock on him? Or like with Trout? I mean, you talk to anybody about Trout and they say, hey, dude, he hasn't won one. What's wrong with him? And it's like, dude, he puts the numbers up, but he doesn't have his teammates doing the same, I think.
Yeah. So sort of like when you're mentioning and your player that hit for power and hit a monstrous home run, but no one was on base. When you're helping these guys hit, are you teaching them the same stuff that's being taught in MLB organizations, like launch angle type stuff and all of that? Or are you focusing on some of the things that are criticized about the MLB, like, come on, hit through the shift. If there's a wide open gap, don't go for the fences, go for the hole.
Yeah, so a little bit of both. So we don't teach what they call a launch angle swing. So the launch angle is just a number. It's just a metric, right? It's a bunt has a launch angle, right? So it's more of an association. They've associated the launch angle swing with a lot of dip and driving, like trying to hit the double, trying to hit the home run. And I tried it. I tried it for maybe about a year or two. And the problem I found was, especially when you're teaching high school kids, is my high school guys would come to me and they'd ask them how their game went on Friday night or Saturday or whatever. And they'd say, well, I flew out 4 times. And remember, we're teaching hit the double and the dinger. We're trying to lift the ball. And we said ground balls are gross and this whole thing. And to hear this kid say he popped out 4 times, if it's one thing that high school coaches hate is fly balls, because at that level, Well, that's kind of the beginning of the level where the fly balls are pretty much out. If you get enough air under it, I mean, they're not likely to get dropped. In junior high and little league, yeah, your fly balls are going to get dropped. The kids are just still figuring out how that looks, how that ball goes up, and then the peak and the apex and how to read that and all that kind of stuff. And it's high school when they kind of figure that out. So I did that, and I was finding a lot of these hitters, they were popping out a lot. And what happens to a high school coach, you start flying out like that, you don't play. They don't play you, or they knock you down into the lineup. And what we do is we do a kind of in moderation. We call it the Goldilocks golden rule, right? We don't want too much of something, and we don't want something that doesn't exist. We want what's just right. Right. And so what we teach when it comes to launch angles is we teach more of a 10 to 15 degree launch angle. So what we say is hit the ball back through the tube. So if you can imagine a tube attaching the pitcher's release point into the catcher. So based on height, so it could be at the hitter's letters, or it could be down at the hitter's knees, wherever height that tube is, we want the hitter to hit it right back through the tube. And that is always their goal, is to hit it back through the tube. Even if they hit a 400-foot shot at a 25, 30 degree launch angle, they're making an adjustment to come back to the tube. So our whole thing is hit the ball hard. We want to hit hard no matter what. So if you hit it hard, 1-hopper, 2-hopper on the ground, which tends to, I can't remember the number. My buddy Perry Husband's really good on the stats of this, but ball exit speed above 95 miles an hour at the big league level, doesn't matter if it's on the ground or whatever. Ground balls actually, I think, is what he was talking about. I think the batting average is like 450 or 550. I mean, we were talking about ground balls suck for like a couple of years, and they actually don't. I mean, let's just hit it hard on a line. That's our goal. And then if we get slightly under the ball and we hit it up at 20 to 30 degree launch, boom, it's out. It's a double or homer. If we get slightly above the center line, we call it fat on fat. So fat of the ball, fat of the bat, both hitting right on cue, again, back through the tube. Whether it's a ground ball on a line or in the air, as long as it's hit hard, that's all we're worried about. So that's a little bit of both, what you're talking about. It's a little bit of the MLB teams and the former players and the coaches, that kind of gut feeling, that feel of what we're trying to do. And then it also takes from the data heads and the econ guys, right, that come in and they say, well, we got to have on base percentage and slugging and, all the new metrics now with the ISO and all that kind of stuff. But we take more of a moderated approach and not so much of an extreme approach when we teach our hitters. Yeah,
because that's definitely something that's criticized in the MLB nowadays, and it's great to see a solution for that.
Oh, yeah.
So now, looking at these two teams and how they match up, and just a reminder, if you're listening, you can scroll down bottom of the show notes. I'll have both lineups and positions. And when you're looking at this, what are some maybe X factors, maybe one or two on each team, that might stand out that could be the difference maker in this game?
Yeah, good question. And I think it's harder right now, like you said, because you chose some younger guys. So they don't have as many years. They don't have 10 years on them. Mike Trout does. Buster Posey does. Judge might be getting
5.
there. 5 years. Yeah. So they're still pretty babyish. So it's hard to tell how many other Mike Trouts those newer guys are going to be, right? We really don't know until their careers are played out and how everything goes. With my team, obviously, those careers have already said and gone. Those guys have passed. And so you already get a good idea of how many Mike Trouts are on this team. And I would say, the ones that stick out, Brooks Robinson, those guys, not to take away from Brooks Robinson or Johnny Bench or any of those guys, but, Babe Ruth, the Hank Aaron, Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, Lou Gehrig. I mean, those Willie Mays, those guys are Mike Trouts. I mean, they're all Mike Trouts. And so it's hard to say how the new team's going to be. We'd almost have to put our forecaster on, but I would say out of the Mike Trouts in the new group, who I think are going to be Mike Trouts, I think I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. because of his dad. You can almost take his dad's career and bring that into the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Because his dad's there. I mean, it's not like his dad's not there, but you can take his dad's career and how his dad did. And I think he might be even better than his dad. He might put better numbers up than his dad, just because of the era. And when his dad played, it was more of the line drive type thing. I mean, he was hammering Vlad Sr., he was hammering. Didn't matter. Every swing he took, he was falling over. His helmet was falling off. I mean, he took daddy hacks. But you can almost take his career, Senior's career, and give it to Vlad Jr. because that's his dad, you know. So I would say I'd watch Vlad as another Mike Trout.
Also the All-Star Game MVP this year.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I would say, you know, Tatis, I love Tatis, and he's also a junior, right? He's got a senior dad. I think he was a Fernando Tatis. Well, I know he played. Who did he play for? Did he play for the A's?
Tatis Sr. He started Texas. On Texas, then St. Louis, and then finished on the Expos.
Okay, so he never
mind. Then he took a few seasons off. He took 04 and 05 off, then went to Baltimore for a year, took another year off, and then 3 with the Mets.
Oh, okay. Oh, I think I do remember him coming back. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Senior didn't have as good of a year or as good of a career as Vlad Senior. But with Fernando, the only thing I caution with him is I've heard some stories. He's just got some, you know, it's that Latin blood. So he tends to showboat a lot, and he's not getting into trouble like Puig, right? Puig is just a mess. I feel so bad for that. I love watching him play, and he's got a great sense of humor. I love his sense of humor, but he's a mess sometimes.
People off on national TV.
He's licking bats. Like he'll take his bat and he'll just lick it with his tongue. Okay. So whatever. But I would say with Tatis, if he can stay out of trouble and stay healthy, this year he had an injury. I think he did early on. I think he's going to be one to watch for sure. I like Judge. He's a big dude. I'm a big small guy fan. So I love rooting for the small guy. That's what we teach. The stuff we teach is to get our hitters to triple their body weight and batted ball distance. So for instance, 100-pounder hitting the ball 300 plus feet. Right. So I'm all about that. And Judge, I mean, shoot, you teach him that same stuff, and he's not going to hit a ball 600 feet because that's not how gravity works. But, you know, he's going to hit it harder ball exit speed wise than anybody because he's got longer limbs and things like that. But yeah, so I would say Vlad Jr., another possible Mike Trout for his career, and Tatis Jr. if he can stay out of trouble and stuff.
Yeah, great. And Aaron Judge, I was actually at the game where he had his longest career home run, 495 feet back in 2017. And he launched that thing, to anyone that knows Yankee Stadium, out to the left field bleachers, I think maybe 4 rows from the concourse, which is super high up and right in front of the wall of retired numbers out there in Yankee Stadium. And he can sometimes test some of those boundaries we put. And it's also a little funny. One time, I think it was in 2020, the ESPN app screwed something up, or maybe it was StatCast screwing something up, where it said that Luke Voit hit a home run like 623 feet or something. And then I saw a picture on Instagram. Someone mapped it out, and they're like, that would have landed in the middle of the street.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And there was a physicist, what do they call it? When they retire, they're not called retired, but out of Illinois. His name's Dr. Alan Nathan. Loves baseball, and those are the physicists I love talking to that love baseball, because they really shine a lot of light on things in the baseball world when it comes to hitting. And he did an article, I think it was on Popular Mechanics or something, and it was what's the longest baseball that can ever be hit, looking at it through a physics perspective. I know there's a lot of talk out there with Mickey Mantle that he hit it 660 feet or whatever it was, right? But that was back in 50s, 60s, right? When we didn't have access to a lot of this tech. So they're just basing it off of where it bounced, and who knows the people that saw where it bounced, if that's actually where it was. And, so you just don't know. So Dr. Alan Nathan did an analysis, and he said, well, if you were playing in Colorado State, and he used Judge as an example. So Judge hitting at the Colorado Rockies, the Mile High Stadium. So you have thin air, a lot of the stuff Ted Williams was talking about, right? From all his military training, fighter pilot training. And, he gave a barometer meeting, what would be optimal for barometer. He said, launch angle, I think he said was 28 degrees or 29 degrees or something like that. A lot of people say 35 degrees and 30. He said 28, 29 degrees. And the ball exit speed, I think, was 115 or 112 miles an hour or something like that, which he has, I think, since StatCast has been tracking ball exit speeds, his fastest ball exit speed was something like 121.3 or something miles an hour. And what it was a one hopper to the second baseman double play. So he hit it so hard, and the second baseman probably just reacted and grabbed it, threw it, and then Judge was probably halfway down the line. But so 20, 27, 28, 29 degrees, 115, 112 degrees at Mile High Stadium. And he said it would go about 528 feet.
Wow.
Yeah. So, we say tripling body weight and bat all distance. And then when they say, well, for Judge, he's almost 300 pounds. Does that mean he's going to hit it 900 feet? Like, no, that's not how gravity works. But the speed is the big thing. So ball exit speed, if they have ball exit speed and you hit the right angle, that's where you're going to be optimal on the distance.
Yeah. All right. So now taking a look at these old timers here and your team. So, I mean, obviously these players are all established all-time greats. And honestly, I think your team would win this just because every single player here stretching across roughly 5 decades is an all-time great. And obviously a lot of these players today are still a bit undecided and, just a smaller pool of players, if you will, to choose from being this year. But I definitely think it would be a great game. And seeing some of these players go up against each other and all of the things, and I think that the current All-Stars might be a more fun team to watch because they all know each other. They're, playing modern baseball. But the old-timers team, that would be just, I think they would honestly crush the current All-Stars just because, you just look up and down this lineup, and these are players that you could count on and were consistent. And nothing to take away from the current All-Stars, but to become an all-time great, you have to finish a career, which and become that legend, 99 overall in MLB The Show. But when you're looking at your team, what might be a notable factor in the game?
Yeah. So again, you said it all. They have a career that we can look at over the whole time, and the newer guys obviously don't have as much time to look at. But the other thing you got to look at too is their environment and the era and what they went through. So you have a lot of the guys in the old time team going through World War II. You have even possibly some, maybe not World War I, like Babe Ruth. He was young, I think, at that point. But when we were going through the whole pandemic thing last year, they were bringing up the Spanish flu. They were saying Babe Ruth had the Spanish flu, and they had a picture of him in the hospital bed recovering from the Spanish flu. So you had a lot of interesting things that happened in these guys' lives. And then the fact that they had to hold jobs in the winter, or the winter, once baseball season ended in the fall, and then winter into April when they started back up again. That's a long time. They got to hold a job. They got to actually do stuff, where these guys get paid so much that, they play a ton of games in a small amount of time, but they're also off. If you have a player that goes spring training in April, reports in April, and then plays all the way through, say, October for the World Series. Say, if you got those two teams that play all the way through, your April, May, June, July, August, September, October, you're talking 7 months. And then they got another 5 months that they're off. Right. So they don't have to work because they make enough money during the season, and they didn't have. So those guys had to grind in the off season to make money so that they could survive. And you had some guys going through the Great Depression in the 30s. Right. So you have a lot of that, like Babe Ruth and Gehrig and one other guy. I should have forgot about Joe DiMaggio. Gosh dang it, that guy! I could have had him on here somewhere, But I think with what they put up with, again, we're looking at a whole career. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. Maybe these younger guys, they did go through the 2020 stuff, which was, that's pretty traumatic, and they went through a lot of different things. But are we going to have another war? Are we going to have something that's going to come up that these guys got to deal with? And so I think the environment also factors into this on deciding, which is better, who would win, and that kind of thing, because that's drive. You're talking about the human brain. You're talking about emotion. You're talking about the drive of these people. And like I said earlier in our call, that some of these younger guys or some of these guys in the United States, I don't feel they're as hungry, or we are not as hungry as some of the guys coming from the Dominican Republic, because they're coming from nothing, trying to get over here so that they can play in America and make a lot of money.
Yeah. All right. So now last quick thing before we wrap this up. If you had to give the game MVP to one player on your team, I guess, do you think that it's going to be a specific position player, or do you think it's going to be Cy Young shutting the current All-Stars out, or where are you going to place this award?
Wow, that would be a tough one. Yeah, that's a tough one. We'd have to see how it plays out. Yeah. I think in the game, obviously, but to make a prediction, I mean, that's really tough. To look at the careers, I don't know. I would say it would be, I'm a hitting guy, so Cy Young is awesome, but I'm just not as into the pitching side. So I got to give him the Cy Young award, at the end of the year. But for the game, well, it's a tie between probably Williams and Aaron. Like those are two of my favorite hitters, and they're both sides of the, you got one on the right, one on the left. And I think for different reasons, again, Hank Aaron went through the whole civil rights stuff. He was being threatened with his life and all that as they were playing around. So I think these guys have some thick skin, and but I would go between Hank Aaron, Ted Williams. I'd have to toss a coin.
Yeah, I can't really argue with that reasoning there. So that's going to wrap up this part of the Substantiate podcast. And before I let you go, Joey, do you want to tell the audience about your book or promote anything else?
Yeah, thanks, William. Yeah, I like this. I like to, usually it's talking about your business or talking about asking questions on your life and things like that. And so I really like this format where we're doing a little bit more of that, like your podcast says, right? So if people want to learn more about hitting, those hitting fans out there, they can go to hittingperformancelab.com, and they can either contact me there or on the socials, just put in Hitting Performance Lab and I'm there, so on the Googles and all that kind of stuff. But other than that, no, I like the format here, and I like what you're doing. I think it's cool. You being a freshman in high school, and how long you've been doing podcasting.
I released the first episode last year on August 26th, I think. So just over a year.
Very cool. And you learned a lot.
Yep.
In the whole process. You're well-spoken. There's a lot of, again, I'm around a lot of kids your age, right? So there's a lot of when they're talking, there's a lot of the likes, and there's the ums and their ahs and things like that. And so that's one thing that I want from we have two kids. You can see them right back here. So Noah's our third grader, our boy, and our girl, Grayson, she's at kindergarten this year. And so I want both of those to do something like what you're doing, because I think it's a great stepping stone for whatever you end up getting into in business and marketing or whatever, even if it's not even that, but this can be a good jumping off point for you to learn some really good skills that'll work with you anywhere. So thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, also just all the people I've met and all the different guests I've had and been able to reach out to. And if you say, hey, do you want to come have an hour-long conversation with me on Zoom? Chances, to someone semi-famous, then chances are it's going to be no. But if you say, hey, want to come on my podcast, then a lot higher chance of saying yes. And it's been great to have you on here today. And so thanks for coming on, Joey.
Yeah, thank you for the time, William.
Hope you enjoyed that episode. Make sure to come back here next Wednesday in your podcast app or on www.substantiatepod.com. Let me know what you thought of this episode, preferably in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, if that is where you listen, or send me an email to substantiatepod@gmail.com, or check me out on Instagram or Twitter. Send me a DM there at substantiatepod on both platforms. I respond to every reasonable DM and email. And if you write a 5-star review, I'll read it on the podcast from now on. So hopefully those will start trickling in. And just don't forget to share this with a friend or post it on your social media. if you're listening on Spotify, there's a really easy way to share it to either your Snapchat or Instagram stories, and it links it nice and easy for someone else to listen on Spotify. So if you can do that, that's great. Or text it to a friend. Why not? Anyway, see you back here next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Substantiate. The best way to help support the show is to, number one, tell your friends about Substantiate. That is the number one way to support us. The second way is to leave us a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. Number 3, follow us at SubstantiatePod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
Hello, I'm Anthony.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
And we're hosts of Capes on the Couch, the podcast where comics get counseling.
Superheroes don't always get to go home happy. That's where we come in.
We offer psychiatric and mental health analysis of comic book characters.
So check us out at capesonthecouch.live and across all social media platforms at Capes on the Couch.